At my daughter-in-law's birthday dinner, at a luxury steakhouse, everyone enjoyed beluga caviar, lobster, and wagyu steak, while I sat there with only 3 cold bread rolls on my plate. She pushed the basket toward me and whispered, "You don't need expensive things. They're wasted on someone like you." My son lowered his eyes and said, "Dad, just go home. Don't ruin this night." I smiled, took a bite of bread, and replied, "Noted." They laughed, until they discovered the dinner they enjoyed was paid for with something they never should have touched. I'm grateful you're here with me. Before we start, drop a quick comment. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Your perspective matters more than you know. Just a note, some details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. The message is what I hope stays with you. I thought my daughter-in-law's birthday dinner would be a night worth remembering, the kind of warmth a family builds over decades. But at Harrington's Steakhouse on a Saturday evening in September, everyone at the table received beluga caviar except me. At 72, I'd built Thatcher construction from a pickup truck and a toolbox into something that mattered. Sold it 7 years ago for $42 million, though no one at this table knew the number. Money changes people, Iris used to say. My late wife was right about most things. The waiter arrived at 7:30 with 6 small plates. The caviar gleamed under the chandelier, tiny black pearls on mother-of-pearl spoons. Preston got a plate. My son, 45 years old, sat beside his wife with the careful posture of a man who'd learned long ago not to meet my eyes when something uncomfortable was happening. Celeste got a plate next. 42 years old today, former trust and estate paralegal who'd spent 8 years learning exactly how families fall apart over money. She knew what she was doing. Hugh Lockwood got a plate. Celeste's father, 65, had ordered the 2-pound lobster without asking if anyone might want to share. His wife, Lorraine, 63, laughed when Hugh told his golf story. Neither glanced at me when my plate arrived. Even Finn got caviar. 9 years old, brown eyes, identical to his grandmother's, the only one at the table who seemed to notice something was wrong. He looked at his mother, then at me, then down at the black pearls on his spoon like he was trying to solve a math problem that didn't add up. My plate was white porcelain, empty except for 3 room-temperature bread rolls. Celeste slid the breadbasket toward me across the white tablecloth. Her voice was sweet as powdered sugar coating something bitter. "You don't need all this, do you, Warren?" she said. "These things are really for people who can appreciate them." The fireplace crackled to my left. The waiter refilled water glasses with practiced silence. Preston cut into his wagyu steak knife, moving with surgical precision, eyes fixed on his plate. He didn't say a word. I picked up a bread roll. It was cold. The butter knife rattled slightly against the porcelain when I reached for it, the only sound at our end of the table. "Noted," I said. Lorraine launched into a story about their cruise to the Greek islands. Celeste touched her mother's hand and smiled like she'd just given me a gift. Preston ate his steak. Finn watched me over the rim of his water glass, those brown eyes asking a question I couldn't answer yet. I've eaten at Harrington's exactly 3 times in my life. The first time was in 1978 when I landed the hospital renovation contract that saved my business. The second was our 30th anniversary when Iris ordered the salmon and told me she'd never been prouder of anyone. Each meal marked a turning point I couldn't see coming until years later. I had a feeling the third time would be no different. The bread tasted like cardboard. I ate it anyway, chewing slowly, washing it down with water while conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Hugh described his new boat. Lorraine showed photos on her phone. Celeste talked about the fall gala. Preston nodded at the right moments, played his part perfectly. Finn pushed his caviar around his plate. He didn't eat it. After a few minutes, he set down his fork and asked if he could have a bread roll instead. Celeste's smile tightened at the edges, but she said yes. I handed him the basket, and when our hands touched for that brief second, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Grief, maybe. Or recognition. Dessert came and went. Coffee arrived. The conversation drifted to topics I had no part in: vacation homes, private schools, investment properties. I sat watching my family discuss money they hadn't earned while I ate bread I hadn't ordered. At 9:15, the waiter brought the check in a black leather folder. Preston reached for it before it touched the table. His hand moved with the smooth confidence of someone who'd done this before, someone who expected to pay. He slid a credit card into the folder without looking at the total, without asking, without the slightest hesitation. "I've got it," he said to the table. "Don't worry about it." The waiter took the folder and disappeared. That's when I saw it, 2 letters that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my son. Just before Preston's thumb covered the card completely, I caught a glimpse. Navy blue with silver lettering. Premium card, the kind they don't give out to just anyone. And in the bottom corner, partially visible beneath his thumb, 2 letters embossed in small capital font. W.T. Warren Thatcher. My initials. I stared at Preston's hand resting on the table. He was talking to Hugh about interest rates, voice smooth and practiced, like he paid $6,000 birthday dinners every weekend. The waiter returned with the folder. Preston signed without looking, added a tip I couldn't see, and tucked the navy blue card back into his wallet. I'd never owned a navy blue credit card in my life. I had 2 cards. One Visa I'd carried for 20 years, one MasterCard Iris had gotten me for emergencies. Both were plain silver. Neither had silver lettering. Neither had ever been to Harrington's Steakhouse, but that card had my initials. I drove home with the windows down, despite the September cold, letting the night air fill the cab. I wasn't thinking about the caviar anymore. I wasn't thinking about Celeste's smile or Preston's silence, or the way Finn had looked at me with those wide brown eyes. I was thinking about 2 letters on a navy blue card, W.T., and I was thinking about a question my late wife Iris had asked 3 months before the diagnosis took everything else away. The house on Maple Drive was dark. When I pulled into the driveway, the kind of dark that reminds you no one is waiting up anymore. No one had been waiting up for 5 years. I parked my dented F-150 in the same spot I'd parked it for 38 years. The engine ticked as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see every window dark: the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom upstairs, where Iris used to leave a lamp on when I worked late. The silence hit harder tonight after the noise of Harrington's. The laughter, the jazz piano, Celeste's voice cutting through it all like a knife through butter. When Iris was alive, the kitchen light would be on. Coffee brewing at midnight because she knew I'd want to talk. She'd be sitting at the table in her bathrobe reading a mystery novel with a cup in both hands, waiting to hear how the job went, or what the bank said, or why I looked like someone had kicked my dog. 5 years gone, and the house still felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for her to come back. I walked through the front door and stood in the dark hallway, keys in my hand. The silence was different now. Heavier. Like it had weight and texture, like I could reach out and touch it if I tried. Iris had asked the question 3 months before the diagnosis took everything else away. We'd been sitting at the kitchen table after Sunday dinner, watching Preston and Celeste's car disappear down Maple Drive. She set down her coffee, always 2 hands, always careful not to spill, and looked at me with those brown eyes that could see through concrete. "D. Warren," she'd said, "when the money is gone and you with it, will they remember how to love you?" I'd told her she was being dramatic. She'd given me the look she reserved for when I was being deliberately obtuse. 3 months later, the cancer showed up in her pancreas like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. 4 months after that, she was gone. But before she left, she'd made me promise something. No big announcements about the sale of Thatcher Construction. No spreading around the $42 million like I was buying affection at wholesale prices. Live simply. Live quietly. See what happens when they don't know what you're worth. I'd kept that promise. For 5 years, I'd driven my dented truck and lived in the same house, and let Preston think his father was a retired contractor, getting by on Social Security and a modest pension. I hadn't planned it as an experiment, but Iris had. And somewhere between her funeral and tonight's caviar dinner, the experiment had been running without me even noticing, until the breadbasket. I climbed the stairs to the bedroom, same side of the bed I'd slept on for 33 years of marriage, though now I sometimes woke on Iris's side without meaning to my hand, reaching across empty sheets looking for someone who wasn't there. From the nightstand drawer, I took out my grandfather's gold pocket watch. He'd given it to me when I was 16, the day I told him I wanted to build houses instead of going to college. He'd nodded once, opened the case, and shown me the engraving on the back plate. Build things that last. I read aloud how. My fingers tracing the letters worn smooth by 3 generations of calloused hands. My grandfather had carried this watch for 50 years before passing it down. Iris used to say I was part rooster, up at 5:30 every morning, no alarm, making coffee loud enough to wake the dead. She'd pull the pillow over her face and groan, and I'd bring her a cup at 6 as a peace offering. "You're insufferable, Warren Thatcher," she'd say. "But you're mine. I built a company that lasted 38 years. I built a marriage that lasted until cancer took it." What was I building now? I set the watch on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. The cherry tree outside the window moved in the wind, branches scratching against the siding like fingernails on wood. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went silent. Iris's question came back like a hand reaching out of the past. When the money is gone and you with it, will they remember how to love you? I'd been defensive that day at the kitchen table. Told her Preston was a good son, that he'd just been busy. That building a business takes time and energy, and sometimes family dinners fall by the wayside. She'd looked at me with something between pity and patience. "Am I?" she'd asked when I called her dramatic. 2 words. That's all it took to plant the seed that had been growing in my chest for 5 years. Now I ran the numbers the way I used to run job site budgets, precise and complete. September 2001. Preston's tuition at Virginia Commonwealth University. $50,000. He'd said the scholarship fell through. I'd written the check without asking questions, because that's what fathers do. April 2009. Down payment on the house at 4821 Burwood Lane. $80,000. I told him he didn't have to pay it back. He'd hugged me in the driveway and said he'd never forget it. Celeste had smiled from the porch like I'd just given her the keys to the kingdom. November 2019. Transfer to Preston's construction company when the bank was 3 weeks from calling his loan. $150,000. He'd told his partner it was an outside investor. I was the outside investor who didn't exist. Total $280,000. All undocumented. All while Preston stood in backyards at barbecues telling people he'd built everything himself. Pulled himself up by his bootstraps, made it without handouts from anyone. What's the difference between loving someone and loving what they can give you? Iris knew the answer. I was just starting to learn it. And tonight, he'd paid for a $6,000 dinner with a navy blue credit card bearing my initials. A card I'd never seen before. A card I'd never authorized. A card that shouldn't exist. I set the watch back in the drawer and turned off the bedside lamp. The cherry tree outside the window was starting to turn at the edges, that deep red that looks like the tree is remembering something it would rather forget. Iris was almost always right. I just hadn't been ready to find out how right she was. Tomorrow, I would start looking at the wall I'd been avoiding. And tomorrow morning, Wallace Greer would call with information that would confirm everything I was beginning to suspect. The phone rang at 8 in the morning, which was early even for me. When I saw Wallace Greer's name on the screen, I knew something had moved him off his normal routine. Wallace was 70 years old, had spent 3 decades as a forensic accountant, untangling other people's financial messes, and didn't call on Saturday mornings unless something mattered. He was the kind of man who counted exits when he walked into a room and straightened picture frames in other people's houses without asking permission. When Wallace called before breakfast, you answered. "Are you home?" he asked. His voice had that careful, measured quality it got when he was choosing words before saying them. "I think we need to have coffee." "When?" "Soon as you can," he said. "There's something I heard last night that I should have called you about sooner." 20 minutes later, I walked into Riverside Diner vinyl booths, the color of old mustard coffee that tasted like it was brewed with opinion's fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly dead. Wallace was already in our usual booth back corner window on the left. He'd ordered for both of us, 2 coffees black, a plate of toast he hadn't touched. He waited until I sat down before speaking. "How long have you been giving Preston money?" he asked. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug. It was too hot to drink, but I needed something to hold. "Why," Wallace pulled a paper napkin from the dispenser and uncapped the pen he kept in his shirt pocket. Old habit from 30 years of forensic accounting. Always have something to write on, always show your work. "I was at Jim Caldwell's cookout last Friday," he said. Preston was there. He stood in Jim's backyard for 40 minutes in front of 15 people and said, I'm quoting him, "I never took a dime from my family. Everything I have, I built myself. No handouts, no shortcuts, pure work." The coffee burned going down, but I drank it anyway. Wallace started writing numbers on the napkin. His handwriting was precise, each digit formed with the kind of care that comes from a lifetime of knowing numbers don't lie even when people do. "September 2001, he said. "Virginia Commonwealth tuition, 50,000. He wrote 50,000 on the napkin. "April 2009. Down payment on Burwood Lane, 80,000. He wrote 80,000 below it. "November 2019. Business loan, 150,000. He wrote 150,000, then drew a line underneath and wrote the total. $280,000, he said, pushing the napkin across the table. "When was the last time Preston said thank you?" My throat was dry. I took another drink of coffee that tasted like ash. "He didn't," I said. "He doesn't know I know how he tells the story." Wallace had spent 3 decades untangling financial fraud, the kind of man who could look at a balance sheet and see the ghost of every lie hidden in the columns. When he wrote numbers on a napkin, they meant something. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, knuckles white. "There's something else," he said. "I ran into Dana Whitfield at the bank Thursday morning. She handles your accounts at First Commonwealth, 8 years? I nodded. "Oh, she looked uncomfortable when your name came up. Wouldn't say much. Couldn't professionally. But she said there was an account she thought you should know about." She looked genuinely worried, Warren. "What kind of account?" She wouldn't say specifically," Wallace said. "But loan officers don't look worried about a man's account unless something in that account shouldn't be there." I drove home with both hands on the wheel and Wallace's words replaying like a loop I couldn't shut off. The white envelope from First Commonwealth had been sitting under the fruit bowl all week. It had come last Tuesday, plain envelope, standard business mail, nothing urgent. I'd told myself it was routine, monthly statement, something that could wait. Standing in the kitchen now, I found it exactly where I'd left it, corner still crisp and unopened. First Commonwealth Bank. My name and address printed in that impersonal computer font that makes everything look official and distant. I picked it up and used the letter opener Iris kept in the ceramic milk bottle cup, the one Finn had made for her when he was 5. The letter opener was shaped like an old milk jug painted blue, the kind of handmade gift a 5-year-old gives his grandmother with both hands and his whole heart. Iris had used it every day until the day she died. I'd kept it in the same cup for 5 years, touching it every time I opened mail like I was touching a piece of her that hadn't left yet. The statement was 6 pages. Account summary, transaction history, standard banking language that turns theft into professional terminology. Page 3 stopped me cold. Loan account number 8832CR. Balance outstanding $150,000. Primary borrower Warren James Thatcher. I set the paper down on the kitchen table, pressing both palms flat against the wood, like I needed to anchor myself to something solid. Read it again. Then a third time. Date opened March 7, 2023. Mailing address for statements: 21 Burwood Lane, Preston's house, not mine. The statements had been going to Preston's house for 6 months, and I'd never seen a single one until this moment. March 2023. I was 6 weeks out from hip surgery that month, moving through the house on a walker, my right leg wrapped in compression, taking pain medication that made the edges of things soft and unreliable. Celeste had been coming by regularly, bringing food, helping with the mail, making sure I wasn't trying to do things I shouldn't. She'd brought paperwork. I remembered that clearly now. Suddenly, the way you remember something that seemed small at the time and only reveals its weight later. She'd said it was insurance-related, supplemental coverage. She'd been organized about it, professional. Pages flagged with those little sticky arrows showing me where to sign. I'd signed them sitting at this table, barely reading the words, trusting my daughter-in-law to handle the details while I concentrated on not dropping my coffee mug. I picked up the phone and called Wallace back. Before I'd finished reading the statement a 4th time. My hand was steady. My voice wasn't. Account number 8832CR, I said. Balance $150,000. Date opened March 7, 2023. Mailing address for statements: 4821 Burwood Lane. Silence on the other end. The deliberate silence of a man processing information and making calculations. Preston's house, Wallace said finally. Preston's house, I confirmed. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could picture him sitting in his living room with a pen already in his hand, writing numbers on whatever surface was closest. "Well, don't call Preston," he said. "Don't call Celeste. Don't contact the bank yet." "Then what do I do?" "I know someone," Wallace said. "Attorney named Simone Blanchard. Elder financial abuse and fraud. I've known her 18 years. She's exactly who you need. Let me set up the meeting." Monday morning at 7:45, I walked into Simone Blanchard's office on the 4th floor of a building on East Carey Street. The hallway smelled like printer ink and old wood. Wallace was already there, standing by a window overlooking the street, coffee in his hand. Simone was 55, with silver-streaked hair pulled back cleanly and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She shook my hand with a grip that meant business and gestured to the chairs across from her desk, without any of the softening preamble people sometimes use when they're about to deliver bad news. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning." I told her about the caviar dinner at Harrington's, the breadbasket, Celeste's comment about things being wasted on people who can't appreciate them, the navy blue card with my initials, the loan statement, March 2023, and the hip surgery. Celeste bringing paperwork with sticky arrows showing me where to sign. Simone listened without interrupting her pen, moving across a yellow legal pad in neat, efficient strokes. When I finished, she read the bank statement I'd brought. Read it twice. Set it down deliberately. "Mr. Thatcher," she said, "what you've described, an account opened in your name without your knowledge or consent, correspondence deliberately redirected so you'd never see it, that's identity fraud under Virginia law. Virginia Code, paragraph 18-178.1. She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands on the desk. Ch'ti. And given your age and your relationship to the person who appears to have opened the account, it also falls under elder financial abuse. That's a separate criminal statute in this state. Both are serious. Both carry real legal consequences for the person responsible. There's a difference between hearing bad news and hearing bad news from someone who knows exactly what they're looking at. Simone wasn't fumbling through sympathy or offering soft reassurances that everything would be fine. She was already 3 steps ahead, building something. I need you to request a full account history from First Commonwealth, she said. Every statement since March. Every transaction. I also need you to authorize me to contact the bank directly on your behalf. We're going to need forensic documentation, signature analysis, IP address logs, if they opened anything online, physical application documents, if they exist. She made 3 phone calls while I sat there. The first to First Commonwealth's fraud department, the second to a handwriting expert she'd worked with before, the third to someone she called a forensic accountant, though not Wallace, someone who specialized in reconstructing financial timelines for court cases. When she hung up from the third call, she looked at me directly. This is going to get worse before it gets better, she said. When we start pulling records, we're likely going to find more. People who do this once don't stop at once. They test boundaries. They see what they can get away with. And when nobody notices, they get bolder. She was right. Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock, I sat in my study at home, reading an email from Simone with a PDF attachment. The subject line was simple: account summary, secondary account 4092, Visa Navy card, balance $31,000, opened in my name, statements routed to Burwood Lane, same as the loan. I opened the file. 41 pages of transactions, line by line, every purchase made with a card I'd never touched, never seen, never authorized. Restaurants, gas stations, clothing stores, home improvement retailers, a furniture store in August. The charges went back 6 months. Page 18 stopped me cold. Harrington's Steakhouse, September, $6,247. I read the line 3 times, each time feeling something tighten in my chest, like a fist closing around bone. The entire caviar dinner. Beluga caviar for the whole table. Wagyu A5 steaks, seafood tower, Krug champagne, Hughes 2-pound lobster. All of it paid for with a credit card bearing my name, opened without my knowledge statements hidden from me deliberately. I'd sat at that table with a plain plate in front of me. I'd eaten cold bread rolls while my daughter-in-law slid the basket toward me and told me expensive things were wasted on people like me. I'd watched Preston pay the bill with that navy blue card, watched him sign the receipt with practiced ease, watched him tuck it back into his wallet like it belonged there. You want to know what humiliation feels like? It's not the plain plate. It's finding out later that the people laughing at you paid for their laughter with money they stole from your name. I stood up from the desk and walked to the window, pressing both palms flat against the frame until my knuckles went white. Outside the cherry tree Iris had planted our first spring in this house was turning at the edges, that deep red that looks like the tree is remembering something it would rather forget. They had humiliated me with my own money. They had ordered Krug champagne with my credit card. And I had sat there with a plain plate and said nothing. I pressed my palms harder against the window frame. Then I went back to my desk and kept reading. Because if there were 2 fraudulent accounts, there might be more, and I needed to know exactly how deep this went before I made my next move. Tuesday morning, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one I haven't touched since Iris organized it the spring before she got sick, and pulled out the folder marked March 2023 hip surgery. The folder was thick, stuffed with documents I'd accumulated during those weeks when getting to the bathroom required a walker, and sitting down felt like negotiating with gravity. I spread everything across my desk under the lamp that made the paper look old and tired. Hospital discharge papers, recovery guidelines, prescriptions for pain medication that made the world soft at the edges. Physical therapy protocols I'd followed religiously until I could walk without limping. In the back of the folder beneath the medical records, I found the stack of papers I'd signed during those early weeks at home. Supplemental medical coverage application. Medical power of attorney. High-pay information release. All normal. All clean language. All exactly what you'd expect someone recovering from surgery to sign when a helpful family member brings them organized, flagged with those little sticky arrows showing where to put your name. I read each page carefully this time without pain medication, making the words slide around. The forms were legitimate. That was the thing that made my chest tighten. They were real documents serving real purposes. But forms are just surfaces. And Celeste had spent 8 years as a paralegal learning what you can build beneath a surface when nobody's looking closely enough. I picked up the phone and called Simone. "I found the surgery records," I said when she answered. "The forms Celeste brought, with the sticky arrows." "Describe them to me," she said. I read the headers aloud. Supplemental coverage, power of attorney, information release. When I finished, Simone was quiet for a moment. "Do you still have the prescription slip from your hospital discharge?" she asked. "The one they gave you at the pharmacy window." I went very still. "How do you know about a prescription slip?" "Because that's what I would use if I were copying your signature," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact professional, the tone of someone who'd seen this particular play run before and knew all the moves. "Hospital discharge. Medication in your system. Hand unsteady. That's the document I'd wait for. Trust is the difference between helping someone when they're vulnerable and exploiting them when they can't see clearly." Celeste had learned the language of the first and weaponized it into the second. Thursday afternoon at 2:30, Simone called with the handwriting expert's report. The signature on the loan application was forged," she said without preamble. "Technical analysis confirms it. The pressure pattern is inconsistent with an original signature. The baseline wavers in a way that indicates copying, not natural writing." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed those forms with Celeste, watching patient and helpful, making sure I didn't miss any of the little arrows. "What specific detail gives it away?" I asked. "I think the way you cross your lowercase t," Simone said. "You always make it a full cross touching both sides of the stem. Miss Alderman at Jefferson Elementary taught you that in 1958, and you've done it the same way for 65 years. The signature on the loan application stops at the right side only. Whoever copied it used a document where the crossing wasn't fully visible." I hung up and went back to the study. Found the surgery folder still spread across my desk. Started going through it again, slower this time, looking for the prescription slip tucked somewhere in the back. It was there, folded once, dated March 8, 2023. I pulled it out with both hands and laid it flat on the desk. There was my signature from the morning they discharged me. The anesthesia was still in my blood that day. My right leg was wrapped in compression bandaging. The nurse had handed me the slip at the pharmacy window, and I'd signed it leaning against the counter because standing without support made the room tilt. And the lowercase t in Thatcher, the cross stopped at the right side only, exactly as Simone had described, exactly as the forged signature on the loan application. I traced the incomplete cross with my finger. My hand had been shaking that morning. The anesthesia, the pain, the compression wrap making my leg feel like it belonged to someone else. I'd signed that slip without thinking the way you sign things when you're just trying to get home and lie down. Celeste had waited for exactly this document. Not random, calculated. You want to know what patience looks like when it's used as a weapon. It looks like waiting 8 months for the exact right moment, the morning after surgery medication, in the bloodstream hand, unsteady on the pen. She'd known the surgery was scheduled. She'd known I'd be on opioids for weeks afterward. She'd known my hand would shake. She'd known there would be paperwork, prescriptions, discharge forms, recovery protocols. And she'd waited for the one document that would give her exactly what she needed, my signature, at its weakest, most unreliable moment. Then she'd come to the house with her fruit baskets and her concerned smile and her helpful organization. She'd brought forms with sticky arrows. She'd sat at the kitchen table while I signed page after page, my hand still unsteady, the medication making me grateful someone else was handling the details. And somewhere in those weeks, she'd taken the prescription slip, studied it, used it as the template for a signature that would open an account I'd never know about with statements mailed to an address I'd never see. 8 months of preparation. That's how long the fraud had been running before I found it. 8 months of charges accumulating on cards I didn't know existed. 8 months of a loan in my name sending statements to Preston's house. That was the level of patience we were dealing with. 8 months. And if Celeste had been that patient setting up the fraud, she would be just as patient trying to finish what she'd started. Wednesday afternoon, when I saw Celeste carrying the fruit basket up my front walk, I knew immediately what was coming. In 38 years of marriage, Iris received exactly 2 fruit baskets. The first when her sister needed surgery and wanted to ask for help without asking directly. The second when a contractor had made an error on a bid and needed to soften the conversation before delivering bad news. Both times the basket arrived before the difficult thing. Celeste was carrying an artfully arranged collection of citrus apples and pears, wrapped in cellophane, with a burgundy bow. Preston walked behind her, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense in that way that told me he'd practiced whatever he was about to say. I opened the door before they knocked. "I picked this up at that nice market on Grove Avenue," Celeste said, extending the basket with a bright smile. "Thought you might enjoy it." I took the basket, matching her smile with one of my own. "That's thoughtful," I said. "Come in, I'll put coffee on." We sat at the kitchen table. The coffee brewed with its familiar sound, rhythmic, domestic, the kind of background noise that makes difficult conversations feel softer than they are. Celeste set a glossy trifold brochure between us with practiced casualness. Sunrise Senior Living, Charlottesville, Virginia. Full-color photographs of smiling people in their 70s, eating lunch in a sunlit room that looked nothing like any lunchroom I'd ever seen. A woman watering plants in a window box. A man playing chess with someone who was definitely paid to play chess with him. "We've been thinking," Celeste began, her voice warm and reasonable, the tone she'd use if she were explaining something to a child who needed help understanding. "This house is wonderful, Warren. But it's a lot of upkeep for one person." Preston leaned forward, elbows on the table. "The market right now," he said, "houses in this neighborhood are moving fast. You could get a great price." I looked down at the brochure, turned it over, read the amenities list printed in elegant font on the back panel. 24-hour nursing care, 3 meals daily, weekly housekeeping, transportation to medical appointments. "How much does Sunrise cost per month?" I asked. Celeste opened the brochure to the back panel with efficient fingers. "Standard suite starts at $5,200 a month," she said. "But the amenities are really," I interrupted gently. "And whatever the house sells for after covering Sunrise, what happens to the remainder?" Celeste's smile returned smooth as butter on warm bread. "We'd help you manage it," she said, "so you wouldn't have to worry about the details. The language of care is easy to learn and easier to weaponize. We'd help you manage it sounds like protection until you realize the same sentence works just as well for a cage as it does for a safety net." I let the silence sit for a moment. Took a sip of coffee. Set the mug down carefully on the table, exactly in the center of the coaster Iris had made from old tiles we'd salvaged from a bathroom renovation in 1997. Let me think about it, I said. I reached across the table and gave Preston's hand a brief squeeze the way you close a conversation without closing a door. His shoulders relaxed. The tension left his jaw. Celeste nodded, satisfied, already reaching for her purse. They thought the squeeze meant yes. I let them think it. After they left, I stood at the kitchen window, watching Preston's car back out of the driveway. Celeste was already on her phone before they reached the street, her head-bent thumb moving across the screen in quick, practiced strokes. Tuesday night that same week, Finn called during his regular check-in. 8:15, same as always. He talked about his math test. First got an A on fractions, showed all his work the way his teacher wanted. I could hear the pride in his voice, that particular brightness kids get when they've done something well and want the people they love to know about it. Then he paused. His voice got quieter. "Grandpa," he said, "what's a trust fund?" My hand gripped the edge of the kitchen sink. The stainless steel was cold against my palm. "Where did you hear that, buddy?" "Mom was on the phone yesterday," Finn said. "She said my name is in one. She said it's for my future." My knuckles went white against the metal. I wasn't trying to listen. Finn continued, his voice carrying that particular note of a child, explaining he hadn't meant to do something wrong. "I just heard through the door. It's a good thing, right?" I opened my mouth, closed it. The cherry tree outside the window was fully turned, now every leaf dark red in the October evening light. A child who asks, "You're in charge, right?" isn't asking a question. He's asking for reassurance that the world makes sense and the people who love him are still the good guys in his story. "You're in charge of mine, right, Grandpa?" Finn asked. My throat was tight. I couldn't answer immediately. The silence stretched long enough that Finn noticed. "Grandpa, we'll talk about it Sunday at the diner, okay?" I said finally. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You and me. Pancakes and the truth." "Okay," Finn said. A pause, then softer, "Love you, Grandpa." "Love you too, buddy." I hung up the phone and stood at the sink for a long time, my left hand still gripping the edge hard enough that my knuckles had gone white. Outside the kitchen window, the cherry tree was fully turned, now dark red in the October evening light, every leaf the color of something burning slow. Finn had asked if I was in charge of his trust fund. The trust fund that had his name written into documents I'd never seen. The trust fund Celeste was building, while a 9-year-old boy did his fractions homework and believed the people who loved him were taking care of his future. How far was I willing to go? As far as it takes, I thought. All the way. Because if they were using Finn's name without his knowledge, I needed to know exactly what documents that name was written into. Friday afternoon, Wallace called with the kind of information that changes the shape of everything you thought you understood. "Warren," he said. "I've been digging deeper into Celeste's background." I was standing at the study window, looking out at the cherry tree. The leaves were falling now, drifting down in slow spirals that made the October air look thicker than it was. Before she married Preston, Wallace continued, she spent 8 years as a paralegal at Whitmore and Associates. Trust and estate law. Specifically, she worked on contested elder care cases. I let that information sink in. Let it settle in my chest, like cold water filling a glass. So she knew exactly what she was building. I said. Every clause, Wallace confirmed. Every loophole. Every way to make it look like care and function like a cage. That's premeditation, Warren. 8 years studying how families fall apart over money, not to help them stay together, but to learn the architecture of the fracture, the exact place where protection becomes control, and no one notices the shift until the door is already locked. I thanked Wallace and hung up. Stood at the window for a while longer watching leaves fall. Tuesday morning at 10:30, FedEx delivered a stiff padded envelope. The return address was Collins and Reyes, LLP, Richmond, Virginia. I signed for it with my full cross on the lowercase t, both sides of the stem, the way Miss Alderman had taught me in 1958. Inside was a document titled Carter Family Legacy Trust Preliminary Draft. 14 pages. I sat down at my desk and read it the way I used to read construction contracts. Sharpened pencil in hand. Marking passages. Checking cross-references. Looking for the places where language does work most people don't see. Page 4 stopped me first. Assets transferred to the Trust Maple Drive property, valued at $900,000 primary savings accounts, and all other assets owned solely or jointly by the grantor at the time of execution. All other assets. That phrase sat there like a trap door waiting to open. Broad enough to catch anything. Specific enough to sound legitimate. Page 7 listed the trustees, Preston Allen Thatcher and Celeste Rose Thatcher. Full management authority over trust assets, disbursements, and administrative decisions. I underlined full management authority twice. Page 11 made my hand stop moving entirely. The grantor shall receive a monthly allowance as determined by the trustees in their sole discretion, taking into account the grantor's needs, the trust's financial position, and such other factors as the trustees deem relevant. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I circled it, drew an arrow to the margin, and wrote in pencil unspecified amount. Unspecified duration. At their discretion. 8 years studying trust and estate law. This was what she'd learned to build. A document that looked like family protection on the surface and functioned like complete financial control underneath. The kind of cage you don't see until you're already inside it and the door has closed behind you. Thursday afternoon at 4:15, Wallace called again. "I've got something else," he said. From a source I didn't expect. "Who?" "Barrett Stone," Wallace said. "Waiter at Harrington's. He's been there 6 years. Remembers you, says you're one of the regulars who actually treats the waitstaff like people. Coffee black. Always says please and thank you." I remembered Barrett. Young man, maybe 30, efficient and professional, the kind of waiter who refills your water glass before you notice it's empty. What about him? The week after the birthday dinner, Wallace said Celeste came back to book another table. Barrett was near the host stand. He overheard her talking to the restaurant manager. It didn't sit right with him hearing someone describe you the way she did when he knew you were sharp as anyone he'd served. So he pulled out his phone and started recording. "Recording what?" "I'm going to play it for you," Wallace said. "Just listen." There was a pause. The sound of Wallace tapping his phone screen. Then a woman's voice came through the speaker, clear and matter-of-fact. Celeste's voice. "He doesn't really understand what he's signing anymore. We handle everything for him now. He'll be moving to a facility soon. It'll be cleaner for everyone." The recording stopped. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, looking out at the driveway, where Iris used to park her car, at the mailbox we'd installed together in 1989, at the cherry tree that had been a sapling when we'd first moved in. Listen to that word, cleaner. Not better, not safer. Cleaner, the language you use when you're solving a problem that's inconvenient, when you're making something more efficient, when you're removing an obstacle. Warren. Wallace's voice came through the phone. "You still there?" "I'm here," I said. "Barrett wanted you to know," Wallace said. "He said it didn't sit right. The way she talked about you like you weren't a person anymore. Like you were a logistics problem. I thought about that. A stranger, a waiter I'd tipped well and treated with basic human decency, had been uncomfortable enough to risk his job recording a customer's private conversation because it hadn't sat right. "Tell him thank you," I said. "Tell him I mean that." "I will," Wallace said. I hung up and stood at the kitchen sink for a long time. "He doesn't understand what he's signing anymore." She'd said it to a restaurant manager. Casual, matter-of-fact, building a story, laying groundwork. making sure that when the time came when people looked at the paperwork and the signatures and the trust documents, they'd remember hearing that Warren Thatcher wasn't quite himself anymore, that he needed help, that decisions were being made for him because he couldn't make them himself. The week after the Caviar dinner, before the trust document arrived, before the Sunrise Senior Living brochure, she'd already been telling people I was cognitively impaired. He'll be moving to a facility soon. It'll be cleaner for everyone. She said it the way you discuss relocating furniture, a logistical problem with a logistical solution, no emotion attached. I thought about the house on Maple Drive, the cherry tree, the gold watch in the drawer, cleaner for everyone. I set the phone down and went to make coffee. Because if Celeste was already telling restaurant managers I didn't understand what I was signing, I needed to know who else she was telling and what file she was building against me. Monday morning, my family doctor called to schedule a routine checkup. That would have been perfectly normal, except my next scheduled visit wasn't for another 3 months. Dr. Kowalski had been my physician for 12 years and had never once called to move an appointment earlier. I wanted to schedule a routine checkup, he said. His voice had that careful, professional quality that meant he was choosing words deliberately. Just to touch base, Doctor, I said, my next scheduled visit is in January, 3 months from now. There was a pause, the kind that means someone is deciding whether to say something. Warren, he said finally. Preston called the office last week. He expressed some concern about memory issues. I told him I hadn't observed anything in our visits, but I thought you should know he called. I stood still looking out at the cherry tree, bare branches against gray October sky. Thank you for telling me, I said. Wednesday afternoon, I received an email from Philip Brennan, my distant maternal cousin who lived in Tennessee and sent Christmas cards every other year. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. Subject line checking in. Dear Warren, the email began. Hope this finds you well. I was speaking with Preston last week and he mentioned you've had some health challenges recently. Just wanted to reach out and see how you're doing. If there's anything Linda and I can do, please don't hesitate to call. I read it twice. Preston was calling my cousins, people I hadn't seen in years. Building a documented trail, medical professionals, extended family, all expressing worry about my cognitive state. You want to know how easy it is to plant doubt about someone's mind. Call their doctor expressing concern. Email their relatives mentioning health challenges. That's all it takes, 2 phone calls, 1 email, and suddenly there's a file with your name on it. I typed a response, keeping my tone deliberately cheerful. Philip, good to hear from you. I'm doing fine, just had my annual physical and everything checked out perfectly. Hope you and Linda are well. Best, Warren. I called Simone immediately, and he's building a file, she said, after I described the doctor's call and cousin's email. Her voice went quiet, the quiet of someone who'd seen this pattern before. Documented concerns from medical professionals and family members. If you refuse to sign the trust, he's preparing to challenge your competency in court. I looked out the window at the bare cherry tree. What if I gave them what they think they want? I said. Explain. Evidence, I said. Video evidence. But on my terms, in my house with my cameras running. There was a pause. Then Simone's voice came back, different, sharper, more focused. That could work, she said. That could work very well. Thursday morning, a technician from Secure Home Systems arrived to install 4 cameras. Living room, kitchen, hallway, front door. Discrete high definition with audio. He mounted each camera with practiced ease, running cables behind baseboards. She's any particular security concerns that prompted this, Mr. Thatcher? He asked while installing the camera in the kitchen. Old man living alone, I said. Just makes sense these days. He nodded, didn't question it. Smart thinking, he said. You'd be surprised how many people wait until after something happens. By noon, the cameras were live feeding to my phone, backing up to cloud storage only Simone and I could access. There's a difference between dishonesty and strategy. Dishonesty is lying for gain. Strategy is using someone's assumptions against them when they're trying to destroy you. Friday afternoon, Simone called. First Commonwealth officially opened the fraud investigation this morning, she said. Both frozen pending review. Saturday morning, Preston stopped by. I walked a little slower from the front door to the kitchen when I let him in. Not dramatically, just carefully. Coffee, I asked. Sure, Preston said. His eyes tracked my movements the way I reached for the coffee pot, set down the mug with deliberate precision. We sat at the kitchen table. I'd left a few papers there, utility bill newspaper with half-finished crossword reminder note about Finn's soccer game. Preston glanced at the papers, then at me. You doing okay, Dad? He asked. You seem a little slower today. I looked up at him, let a beat of silence sit there before responding. Ray, what was that? I said. The coffee maker was loud. I'd heard him perfectly. The coffee maker had been off for 3 minutes. Preston repeated himself. I nodded, smiled, took a sip of coffee. I could see him cataloging it. Every hesitation, every moment where I seemed just slightly off, building his file. It felt dishonest, like playing a role instead of being myself. Then I thought about the sticky arrows. The prescription slip she'd waited 8 months to copy. 8 years of studying how to build a cage that looked like care. It felt dishonest. But then I thought about the sticky arrows on the paperwork Celeste brought while I was on opioids. I thought about 8 months of calculated patience and a prescription slip copied to the letter. And I kept moving slowly. Because if they wanted to build a file showing I couldn't think clearly, I'd give them exactly what they expected, right up until the moment I showed them the cameras had been recording the whole time. Finn's team was down by 2 goals when the wind shifted and carried Celeste's voice across the soccer field. It was Sunday morning, early November, and I was standing on the sideline at Westover Hills Park, watching my grandson play the kind of soccer that's all heart and no strategy. The cameras had been running at home for 4 days now. Preston had visited twice. Both times I'd moved a little slower, asked him to repeat himself, left papers on the kitchen table where he could see them. Both times he'd cataloged every hesitation like a man building a case. But this morning was different. This morning I was just a grandfather watching a 9-year-old kid chase the ball across wet grass. And for an hour, I could let myself forget about fraud complaints and forged signatures and trust documents written in language designed to look like protection. Finn was playing center forward, his jersey, 2 big shin guards, sliding down his legs every time he ran. The other team was faster, more organized, clearly from a club that took youth soccer more seriously than Westover Hills Recreation League did. But Finn didn't seem to notice or care. He just kept running. In the 31st minute, something shifted. The ball bounced off a defender's knee and rolled straight to Finn's feet. He didn't hesitate, just kicked it hard and clean low and to the left, past the goalkeeper's outstretched hands. The net rippled. The scoreboard changed. 2-2. I cheered loud enough that the parents next to me looked over and smiled. Finn turned toward the sideline, found me in the crowd, and raised both fists over his head like he'd just won the World Cup. Halftime came 10 minutes later. The kids ran to their bench for water and orange slices. I walked toward the parking lot to stretch my legs, hands in my jacket pockets, watching the November sky threaten rain. That's when the wind shifted. I heard Celeste's voice before I saw her. She was standing 40 feet away near the concession stand, phone pressed to her ear, back turned to the field. The wind carried her words across the grass like it wanted me to hear them. The 870th appraisal came through, she said. I stopped walking. We're moving forward with the trust structure, she continued. Her voice was matter-of-fact, professional, the tone she used when discussing logistics. Finn's name goes on the beneficiary line that gives us the tax advantage we need. I stood there for exactly 11 seconds. I know because I counted my heartbeats 7 per second when you're that angry. We move the funds before he talks to anyone else, Celeste said. Before he has time to think about it, or call a lawyer, or do anything that complicates the timeline. She laughed at something the person on the other end said. Then she ended the call and walked back toward the field, sliding her phone into her pocket like she'd just been ordering takeout. The $870,000 appraisal. My house. The one Iris and I bought in 1985 for $180,000 and spent 38 years turning into something that mattered. They'd had it appraised. Without asking. Without telling me. And Finn's name on the beneficiary line. My grandson, 9 years old, playing soccer 40 feet away with orange slices in his mouth and grass stains on his knees. They were going to put his name on documents he couldn't read, involve him in fraud. He couldn't understand, use him as a tax shield, while he did his fractions homework and asked his grandfather about trust funds through closed doors. The whistle blew for the second half. I walked back to the sideline, stood in the same spot I'd been standing all morning. Watched Finn run back onto the field. They say you can't be in two places at once. But that afternoon, I managed it, half of me watching my grandson win his game, the other half, 3 steps ahead, in a legal war Celeste didn't know had started. In the 68th minute, Finn scored again. A header this time, perfectly timed, arcing over the goalkeeper into the upper right corner. The winning goal. His team mobbed him. The coach pumped his fist. Parents cheered. I cheered too. Genuinely. Because whatever was happening with trust documents and fraud complaints and security cameras, Finn had just scored the winning goal in a soccer game, and that mattered. After the game, I drove home with the windows down, despite the cold. Finn was going to Preston's house for lunch. I was going home to an empty house with 4 cameras running and a fraud complaint filed with First Commonwealth Bank that Celeste didn't know existed. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a man standing on my front porch. Gary Perkins stood there with a clipboard and a camera hanging from his neck, mid-50s tan work vest, the kind of appraiser who shows up unannounced and calls it professional thoroughness. "Mr. Thatcher," he said as I got out of the truck. "That's me." Gary Perkins, Crest View Property Services. "I'm just doing a follow-up measurement on the exterior. Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. Your daughter-in-law mentioned you were out this morning." Your daughter-in-law mentioned. Of course she had. "Take your time," I said. I unlocked the front door and went inside, leaving him to measure whatever he needed to measure. Through the living room window, I watched him walk the perimeter of the house with his measuring tape and camera documenting the property Celeste planned to put in a trust with Finn's name on it, before he talks to anyone else. I stood at the window watching Gary Perkins photograph the house Iris and I had built our life in and thought about Celeste's phone call on the soccer field, before he talks to anyone else. I had already talked to Simone Blanchard 72 hours earlier. The fraud complaint had been filed Thursday morning. Celeste's timeline was dead, she just didn't know it yet. The pen Simone handed me weighed more than it should have. Estate documents always do. Friday morning, mid-November, I sat in Simone's boardroom with Wallace on my left and a stack of papers in front of me that would determine what happened to everything Iris and I had built together. Through the window, I could see East Carey Street 4 floors below, cars moving through intersections like pieces on a board I was finally learning to play. Roger Finch arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. He'd been a Richmond notary public for 23 years, carried steel-rimmed glasses and a leather portfolio, and had a stamp that could end arguments. He set his tools on the table with practiced precision and nodded at Simone. "Last will and testament of Warren James Thatcher," Simone said, sliding the first document toward me. "Revised November 2023. I read every page. Not because I didn't trust Simone, I did, but because signing documents without reading them was how I'd gotten into this mess in the first place. Page 3. The house on Maple Drive remains mine until death. No transfers, no liens, no trust structures that could strip it away while I was still breathing. Page 5, upon death, all assets transfer to an independent fund managed by Simone's firm. Finn receives his portion at age 25. Preston and Celeste are explicitly excluded from any trustee or management role. Page 7, $2 million, allocated to establish the Iris Thatcher Foundation, dedicated to building affordable housing for working families in Richmond. I set down the pen and looked at Wallace. The foundation, I said. Name it after my mother. The Iris Thatcher Foundation. Wallace's eyes went soft at the edges. He'd known Iris, had done our taxes for 30 years, had sat at our kitchen table more times than I could count. $2 million to housing, he said quietly. She would have liked that. Simone made a note on her legal pad. Roger Finch adjusted his glasses and prepared the signature pages. I signed my name on each designated line. Warren James Thatcher. The lowercase t crossed completely on both sides of the stem, exactly as Miss Alderman had taught me in 1958. No one would ever forge this signature again. Roger Finch stamped each page with his notary seal. The stamp made a sound I'll never forget. Thunk, like a vault door closing on 32 years of hoping my son might love me for free. Would witnessed and notarized. Roger said, gathering the documents into a folder. These are now legally binding. Simone shook my hand. Wallace put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. I walked out of that building knowing Preston and Celeste could scheme and plan and forge signatures all they wanted. The house was protected. Finn's future was protected. And $2 million would go toward building something Iris would have been proud of. Before I reveal what First Commonwealth Bank discovered in their security logs, are you still with me? Comment A. If you think Preston knew about the money from the start, or B, if he only found out recently, add one reason why. Quick note, upcoming details include some narrative elements for impact. The lesson is what matters. Monday afternoon, I was at home when Simone called. Warren, she said. Her voice had that careful quality it got when she was about to deliver information that would hurt. First Commonwealth Bank flagged some suspicious activity on your accounts during their fraud investigation. I sat down at the kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear. What kind of activity? 3 failed login attempts from an IP address in Richmond, she said. October. Someone tried to access your main account 3 times. The attempts failed because of your 2-factor authentication. October, 2 months ago. Before the appraisal. Before the soccer game. Before I knew any of this was happening. Well, did they trace the IP? I asked. There was a pause on Simone's end. The kind of pause that means the answer is going to be worse than the question. The IP traces to your son's router, Warren, she said. 4821 Burwood Lane. I stood up from the table, walked to the window, looked out at the cherry tree, completely bare now, just black branches against gray November sky. They've known, I said. The whole time they've known. Preston had tried to access my account in October. 3 attempts. Failed because I'd set up 2-factor authentication years ago when the bank recommended it. He'd been looking for the money, searching for it, trying to get into accounts I'd kept hidden. And when that failed, when the digital route didn't work, they'd moved to Plan B. The trust document, the forged signatures, the house appraisal, the careful construction of a narrative about my declining mental capacity. Iris had asked me 5 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table after Preston and Celeste drove away, when the money is gone, and you with it, will they remember how to love you? I had the answer now. They had known about the money all along. The question they'd been asking wasn't whether they loved me. The question they'd been asking was different. How do we get to it before he's gone? The caviar dinner made sense now. The breadbasket. Celeste's comment about things being wasted on people who can't appreciate them. She'd been testing me, seeing if I'd react, seeing if I knew about the card with my name on it, the account they'd opened, the charges they'd been racking up. When I didn't react, when I sat there quietly eating bread rolls, they'd taken it as confirmation. He doesn't know. He doesn't check his accounts. He doesn't pay attention. And they'd escalated. October IP attempts, November appraisal, December trust document deadline. A timeline built on the assumption that I was exactly what they needed me to be: old, trusting, and blind to what was happening in my own financial life. But Warren. Simone's voice came through the phone. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "The bank is treating this as attempted unauthorized access," she said. "Combined with the forged signatures and the fraudulent accounts, this strengthens your case considerably." I thanked Simone and hung up, stood at the window for a long time, watching the bare branches move in the wind. The sofa in Preston's living room cost $4,800. I know because I paid for it. Saturday evening, late November. I walked into Preston's house for dinner and saw it immediately. Charcoal gray, clean lines, the kind of furniture that belongs in magazines. I recognized it the second I sat down. Page 18 of the transaction summary Simone had sent me. August of last year. Riverside Home Furnishings. Account number 8832CR. The account opened in my name while I was recovering from hip surgery. They'd furnished their living room with money stolen from a credit card I'd never authorized, and now I was sitting on it. Dinner was pot roast. Celeste had set the table with care, good plates, cloth napkins, a centerpiece of fall leaves that probably came from the same expensive market where she'd bought the fruit basket. Conrad and Elaine, Celeste's parents, whom Preston had invited without asking me, sat across from me. Finn was at the end of the table pushing carrots around his plate. Halfway through the meal, Conrad set down his fork and looked at me. "I heard you might be thinking about selling the house, Warren," he said. His voice was casual, conversational, like he was asking about the weather. "Big decision at your age." I looked at Preston. He was cutting his steak with surgical precision, eyes fixed on his plate, not looking up. I said. That was all. Just a sound. Not agreement. Not disagreement. Just acknowledgement that words had been spoken. Conrad nodded like I'd given him a full answer and went back to his pot roast. After dinner, Finn pulled me aside to show me his International Space Station model. He'd been working on it for weeks, fitting together tiny pieces with the kind of focus most adults lose by age 30. We sat in the corner of the living room on the $4,800 sofa while he explained each module. "Stadisu. This is the Zvezda service module," he said, pointing to a section near the center. "It has the life support systems. And this is the Harmony node where the astronauts sleep." His voice was serious, proud. He'd learned the names. He'd learned what each piece did. Then he looked up at me and his voice got quieter. "Grandpa," he said, "are you okay? You seem different." I looked at him. Those brown eyes. Iris's eyes. Searching my face for an answer I couldn't give him yet. "I'm working on something," I said. "Is it hard?" "Yes." "No, are you going to be okay?" I put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed once. "Yes, buddy," I said. "I'm going to be fine." Finn's eyes, Iris's eyes, asking if I was okay. The only person in that house who cared, and he was 9 years old. "Can we go to the diner Sunday?" he asked. "Absolutely," I said. "Triple stack pancakes." He smiled. Went back to explaining the solar panels. Tuesday afternoon, FedEx delivered a padded envelope to my front door. I signed for it and brought it inside, already knowing what it would be. Proposed family asset transfer agreement. 14 pages. Deadline for signature December 15th, 2023. I sat at my desk in the study with a sharpened pencil and every piece of evidence Simone had gathered spread out beside me. Bank statements, transaction summaries, the handwriting expert's report, Barrett Stone's audio recording, the IP trace logs from First Commonwealth showing Preston's failed attempts to access my accounts. Then I started reading. Page 1, Definitions and Parties, Standard Legal Language. Page 4, Assets to be Transferred. The House on Maple Drive. Primary Savings Accounts. And the phrase that made my jaw tighten, all other assets owned solely or jointly by the grantor at the time of execution. I wrote in the margin account, 32 CR forged signature. Page 7, Trustees with full management authority. Preston Allen Thatcher and Celeste Rose Thatcher. I wrote IP trace, Oct 1517 Burwood Rooter. Page 9, Provisions for grantor care and support. I wrote recording Barrett Stone, doesn't understand what he's signing. Page 11 stopped me completely. Monthly allowance $2,000, subject to grantor's appropriate conduct and cooperation with trustee decisions regarding health living arrangements and financial matters. I read that sentence 3 times. They were going to pay me to be quiet with my own money. $2,000 a month drawn from my own accounts, managed by them, contingent on my appropriate conduct and cooperation. Cooperation meant doing what they said. Moving to Sunrise Senior Living, signing whatever they put in front of me, not asking questions, not talking to lawyers, not causing problems. I picked up the red pen I kept in the top drawer for marking critical issues on construction plans. On page 11 in the margin next to the allowance clause, I wrote in capital letters, "Not signing." Then I picked up the phone and called Simone. She answered on the first ring. "Deadline is December 15th, I said. 2 weeks. There was a pause on her end. Not hesitation, recognition. Someone who'd been expecting this call. "Warren," she said. Her voice had changed. Still professional, still measured, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I think it's time we talked about how this ends." I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. Outside, the cherry tree was completely bare. No leaves left. Just black branches against the November sky, every line visible, nothing hidden. "Tell me," I said. "You've been gathering evidence," Simone said. "Playing defense, documenting everything they've done, the forged signatures, the fraudulent accounts, the IP attempts, Barrett's recording. All of it." "Yes, that's good," she said. "That's necessary. But evidence only matters if you use it. And right now, they think they're still in control. They think you're going to sign that document because you don't know any better. Because you're old and confused and dependent on them for help." I pressed my hand flat against the window frame. "Oh, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Simone said, "that it's time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. It's time to show them exactly how much you know. It's time to make them understand that every move they've made, every document they've forged, every dollar they've stolen, you've been watching. And you've been building a case." The December sky was the color of old steel, cold, hard, unforgiving. "How?" I asked. Simone's voice came back quiet and deliberate. "Then we give them exactly what they want," she said. "We let them think they're about to win, and then we show them the trap they walked into." Simone laid 3 manila folders on the conference table, civil criminal combined, and asked me which ending I wanted. Wednesday morning, early December. Simone's boardroom on the 4th floor of East Carey Street. Wallace sat to my right, legal pad, open pen ready. Through the window behind Simone, I could see the city moving through its routines. People going to work, traffic lights changing, life continuing like it always did, while families destroyed each other over money. Simone opened the first folder. "Option 1, she said. "Civil lawsuit? We sue for restitution of all fraudulent charges plus damages. It's clean. It's contained. You get your money back, they pay penalties, and we keep this out of the criminal system." She opened the second folder. Option 2. Criminal report to authorities. We file formal complaints with Richmond Police, Virginia Attorney General, and FBI. Bank fraud is a federal crime. They face potential prosecution, possible jail time. But it's out of your hands once we file. The state decides what happens next. She opened the third folder. Option 3. Combined approach. We threaten criminal prosecution, but offer settlement. They make full restitution, accept responsibility, agree to permanent restraining orders. If they refuse or violate terms, we file criminal charges. It gives you control over the outcome. I looked at the 3 folders. 3 different endings to the same story. 3 different futures for my son. Which path gets my name cleanest? I asked, and sends the clearest message that this cannot be done to anyone else. Simone didn't hesitate. Sat third, she said. But it requires naming both Preston and Celeste explicitly in all documentation. No quiet version, no family privacy, everything on record. I reached into my vest pocket and pulled out my grandfather's gold pocket watch. Set it on the table between us. The same watch he'd carried for 50 years. The same watch he'd given me when I was 16 and told me I was going to build houses. The watch ticked on the table between us, 78 years old, still keeping perfect time, outlasting the man who carried it, and waiting to outlast me too. My grandfather built things that lasted, I said. Let's build something that lasts. File everything. Wallace wrote something on his legal pad. Simone picked up her phone and started making calls. Monday, December 15th arrived like any other Monday. I woke at 5:30, made coffee, walked to the end of the driveway to get the newspaper. The December air was cold enough to see my breath. The cherry tree stood bare against the gray sky, every branch visible, nothing hidden. At 8:15, my phone rang. Preston's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text from Simone Collins and Reyes just called our office. Informed them you are represented by counsel. They did not take that well. I poured another cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Listened to the voicemail Preston had left. Dad, it's Preston. Haven't heard back about the documents. The date on the agreement, December 15th, that's today. Just wanted to check in. Give me a call when you get this. His voice was measured, controlled. The voice he used when he was trying very hard to sound casual about something that mattered. At 10 o'clock, he called again. I let it go to voicemail. Dad, it's me again. We really need to finalize this. The attorney needs the signed documents by end of day. Can you please call me back, ce qui surtout pourtant? The measured quality was starting to crack. Little edges of something sharper showing through. At 2 o'clock, he called a third time. I let it go to voicemail. You need to understand the situation you're creating. The agreement has a deadline for a reason. If you don't sign by end of day, there are going to be complications. Legal complications. I need you to call me back. Now. No dad that time. No pretense of casual concern. Just demand. Just pressure. I listened to all 3 messages back to back. 8:15 in the morning. Dad just following up. 10 o'clock. We really need to finalize this. 2 in the afternoon. You need to understand the situation you're creating. The warmth was draining out of his voice in real time. Each message a little colder. Each message a little more of the mask slipping away. By the 2 o'clock message, what was underneath had started to show. Not concern, not love, just the calculation of someone who'd built a plan around a specific timeline and was watching that timeline fall apart. I deleted all 3 messages and put my phone in my pocket. Turned up the radio, put on my jacket, drove to the hardware store on Broad Street. The paint section was in the back, past the lumber and the electrical supplies. I found the color I'd been thinking about for months. Deep blue. The color Iris had circled in a home improvement magazine 20 years ago and said would look perfect on the window shutters. I bought 2 gallons and a new brush. On the drive home, I thought about Preston's voicemails, the way his voice had changed over the course of 6 hours. The way the person he'd been pretending to be had started to disappear when he realized I wasn't going to do what he expected. I thought about Simone's text, Collins and Reyes calling her office, being told I was represented by counsel, not taking it well. I thought about the December 15th deadline passing like water under a bridge, irrelevant now, meaningless. I pulled into my driveway and carried the paint cans to the garage, set them on the workbench next to the brushes and drop cloths. The shutters needed blue. They had always needed blue. Iris had known that 20 years ago. I was just finally getting around to it. Inside the house, my phone buzzed. Another text from Simone Preston called my office directly, demanding to speak with you. I told him all communication goes through me. He hung up. I set the phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the bare cherry tree. The masks were coming off now, one by one, layer by layer. And I was going to keep living my life, making coffee, reading the newspaper, painting shutters the color my wife had wanted, while they figured out what it felt like when the person you'd been trying to control turned out to be 3 steps ahead the whole time. Preston came alone. That was the first sign he understood how much trouble he was in. Saturday morning, mid-December. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I saw his car pull into the driveway. Just his car. Not Celeste's. No Finn in the back seat. Preston by himself, climbing out with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders hunched against the cold. I opened the door before he knocked. "Coffee?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Thanks." I poured 2 cups, set them on the kitchen table. Preston sat down in the chair he'd sat in when he was 6 years old, back when this table was new and Iris was alive, and Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. "Not Dad," he said. "I know you've been talking to a lawyer." I took a sip of coffee, set the mug down carefully on the coaster. "Which account at First Commonwealth?" I asked. Preston blinked. "What?" "Which account?" I said again. My voice was calm, measured. The voice I used to use when reviewing job site budgets with subcontractors who'd made errors they thought I wouldn't notice. "Account number 8832CR. Balance $150,000. Date opened March 7, 2023. Mailing address for statements 4821 Burwood Lane." Preston's face went pale. The color drained out of it like water running down a sink. "I can explain. November 2019. I continued. "Your business was 3 weeks from the bank calling the loan. Do you remember that?" He didn't answer. "I transferred $150,000 on a Tuesday afternoon. Saved your company. Saved your partnership. You told your business partner it was an outside investor who believed in the project." I picked up my coffee mug, took another sip. "I was the outside investor who didn't exist," I said. "And you never paid it back, never mentioned it again. Just let me think you'd found someone else to save you." Preston was sitting in the chair he'd sat in at age 6, drinking coffee I'd paid for in a house my money had kept asking me to understand why he'd stolen from the man who'd given him everything. "September 2001, I said. "Virginia Commonwealth tuition, $50,000. April 2009, down payment on your house, $80,000. November 2019, business rescue, $150,000. Total $280,000. All undisclosed. All while you stood in backyards telling people you built everything yourself." Preston set down his coffee mug. His hand was shaking. "Dad, please. And then you opened a credit card in my name," I said. "While I was recovering from surgery. While Celeste was bringing me paperwork with sticky arrows. You charged $6,000 for a birthday dinner where you gave me bread rolls and told me expensive things were wasted on people like me. Preston looked down at the table, said nothing. I stood up, walked to the sink, poured out the rest of my coffee. You should go, I said. He left without another word. Wednesday afternoon, Celeste called. First time in months. I was in my study when the phone rang. Her name on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Warren, she said. Her voice had changed. The soft layer was gone. Only the hard core underneath. I understand you've retained legal counsel. That seems very formal for a family matter. It is a formal matter, I said. We're family, she said. The word came out sharp, brittle. We're trying to help you. We're trying to make sure you're taken care of. I know, I said. That's what the documents say. Silence on her end. Brief, calculated. Warren, whatever you think you know. Ma Celeste, I said. Just her name. One word. Enough to stop her. Another pause. My attorney's name is Simone Blanchard, I said. Her office number is on the letterhead you received. I'd suggest using it. I hung up. We're family. The same words Iris used when she meant love. The same words Celeste used when she meant leverage. She called back twice that afternoon. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both times she left messages that started with, Warren, we need to talk about this like adults, and ended with variations of, you're making a mistake. I deleted both without listening to the end. That evening at 7 o'clock, Simone called. Warren, she said. Collins and Reyes called my office an hour ago. They're proposing a private resolution. They want to meet, discuss settlement terms. Keep this out of the criminal system. I was standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the cherry tree. Bare branches against the December sky. Every line visible. Nothing hidden. What did you tell them? I asked. I told them I'd discuss it with my client and get back to them, Simone said. They sounded nervous, Warren. They used the word private 4 times in a 5-minute conversation. They're scared. Good, I said. Do you want to meet with them? I thought about Preston sitting in the childhood chair, his face pale, his hand shaking on the coffee mug. I thought about Celeste's voice on the phone, the soft layer gone, just hard calculation underneath. I thought about the 14-page trust document with the allowance clause that would have paid me $2,000 a month, drawn from my own money contingent on my cooperation. Saturday, I said. Let them stay scared until Saturday. Then we'll talk about how this ends. Saturday it is, Simone said. I'll set it up. I hung up and stood at the window for a long time. The paint cans were still in the garage. 2 gallons of deep blue. The color Iris had wanted for the shutters. The color I'd been putting off for 20 years because there was always something more urgent, always something that needed fixing first. Not anymore. Saturday, we'd sit down with Collins and Reyes and Preston and Celeste. Saturday, we'd lay out the evidence, the forged signatures, the fraudulent accounts, the IP attempts, the recordings, the handwriting analysis. Saturday, they'd see exactly how much I knew and exactly how long I'd been watching. But tonight, I was just a man standing in his kitchen, looking out at a bare tree thinking about blue paint, and the woman who'd wanted to see it on the shutters before she ran out of time. I arrived at Harrington's 15 minutes early and took the chair at the head of the table. Not the foot where I'd sat in September. The head. Saturday evening, late December. The same restaurant where Celeste had given me bread rolls and told me expensive things were wasted on people who couldn't appreciate them. The same corner table by the fireplace. But this time I sat at the head and Wallace sat to my right. Conrad and Elaine arrived first. I watched Conrad's eyes sweep the table, land on me at the head, register the arrangement. He sat down without comment. Preston and Celeste came next. Celeste saw me at the head of the table and something flickered across her face. Adjustment. Recalculation. She sat down across from me with the smooth composure of someone who'd spent 8 years learning not to show surprise. When the waiter came, I ordered for the table. The caviar for Mr. Lockwood, I said. Wagyu for Mrs. Lockwood. I'll have the ribeye medium. And bring us the bread basket. The waiter wrote it down and left. Celeste heard every word. She'd heard me order the bread basket, the same bread basket she'd slid toward me in September, with that sweet voice and those cutting words. Dinner proceeded. Conversation was careful, polite. The kind of surface-level exchange that happens when everyone at the table knows something is about to break, but nobody wants to be the one to break it. After the plates were cleared and before dessert arrived, I placed both hands flat on the table, reached into my inner vest pocket, pulled out 3 sheets of paper folded into thirds, unfolded them slowly, laid them flat on the white tablecloth. September 2001. I said. My voice was calm, even. The voice I used to use reading construction metrics at job site meetings. Preston's tuition at Virginia Commonwealth University. $50,000. I paused. Let the number sit there. Shots on April 2009. Down payment on the house at Burwood Lane. $80,000. He told people he'd saved aggressively for 2 years. Another pause. Conrad's fork stopped moving. November 2019. Transfer to Preston's construction company. $150,000. He told his business partner it was an outside investor who believed in the project. I set down the first sheet. Looked at Conrad directly. I'm not reading this to shame him, I said. I'm reading it because you were told he built everything himself. You deserved the truth. Numbers don't lie the way people do. Each line item was a truth that couldn't be argued with, couldn't be spun, couldn't be loved away. I picked up the second sheet. September 5th, 2023. Harrington's Steakhouse. $6,247. Charged to a credit card opened in my name without my knowledge or consent. The signature on the application is not mine. I set down the second sheet. That's when Simone walked in. She'd been waiting in the bar. Now she crossed the dining room with a folder in her hands and set it on the table beside my papers. Warren, she said. A greeting. An acknowledgement. She opened the folder. First Commonwealth Bank has frozen both accounts pending investigation, she said. Her voice was professional, precise. The voice of someone delivering facts that carried their own weight. A certified handwriting expert has confirmed the signatures on both the loan application and credit card application are forgeries. She turned a page. The Richmond FBI field office has opened a formal investigation under Title 18 United States Code, Section 1344. Federal bank fraud. The Virginia Attorney General has accepted the file under Virginia Code Section 18.2, 178.1. Felony larceny and identity fraud. Conrad's face when I'd said Preston told people he'd saved aggressively. That was the moment a father-in-law learned his son-in-law had been a fiction all along. Celeste stood up, grabbed her purse, walked out of the restaurant without a word. Her heels clicked across the hardwood floor, past the bar, through the front door, into the December cold. Preston stayed. He sat with his face in his hands, elbows on the table, shoulders shaking. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, counted out enough cash to cover the entire meal and the tip, set it under the salt shaker. Merry Christmas, everyone, I said. Wallace stood with me. Conrad and Elaine sat frozen. Simone gathered her folder. I walked through the restaurant the same way I'd walked in, past the bar, through the front door, into the parking lot where my truck waited under the streetlights. I was halfway to the truck when I heard footsteps behind me. Dad. Preston's voice, cracking, raw. I stopped. turned around. He stood there in his suit jacket, no coat shivering in the December air. His face was red, tears on his cheeks. "I can't stand up to her," he said. "I want you to know I know that about myself." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "But I see it, Dad," he said. "Everything you did in there. Everything you've always done." I looked at my son, 45 years old, standing in a parking lot in December, finally seeing something he should have seen decades ago. I put my hand on his shoulder, held it there for a moment, felt him shaking. Then I let go and walked to my truck. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the heater on, and Merle Haggard on the radio, because some nights you need a voice that understands hard weather. Somewhere around the Belvedere Street intersection, I thought about my grandfather's watch in the drawer at home, 78 years old, still keeping perfect time. He'd built things that lasted. I think I'd just done the same. Preston walked into Simone's office alone on Tuesday morning and signed away his claims without reading past page 3. 3 days after Harrington's, I stood in my kitchen watching ice melt in my coffee. Preston had broken in that parking lot, but broken wasn't the same as done. Simone had called the night before to say he'd requested a meeting. Just him, no Celeste, no lawyers except her. "Doc, he wants to settle," she'd said. I think Sunday scared him more than the FBI ever could. I didn't ask what time. Didn't ask to be there. Some things a man needs to do alone, even if he's doing them 40 years too late. The call came at 10:47 a.m. "It's done," Simone said. Her voice carried that particular tiredness lawyers get when a case ends, not with a bang, but a signature. He signed the full settlement, all fraudulent accounts closed and transferred back to your estate. The house on Burwood Lane returned to your ownership. Complete withdrawal of any claims to your trust or assets. I set my mug down. "How'd he look?" "Tired. Older." She paused. "He asked me something before he left." "What's that?" He said, "Is my father okay? Not how is he or what does he want? Just, is he okay?" I closed my eyes. 45 years I'd known Preston, and I still couldn't tell if that question came from guilt or love or just the hollow space where both used to be. "What did you tell him?" "I said you were painting your house." She wasn't wrong. I'd bought the paint 2 days ago, 6 gallons of deep evening blue that Iris had circled in a catalog 3 years before she died. She'd wanted the shutters done that color said it reminded her of the lake house her parents rented when she was small. I'd promised I'd get to it. 42 months later, the catalog still sat in my garage with her pencil mark on page 17. I'd bought the paint the morning after Harrington's. Didn't plan it. Just walked into Miller's Hardware, pointed at the color chip I'd carried in my wallet, and said, 6 gallons. The kid behind the counter couldn't have been 20, had looked at the worn paper and said, "You've been carrying this a while." "Long enough," I'd told him. Now I stood on the ladder with a brush in my hand and Simone's voice in my ear. "There's something else," she said. "The U.S. Attorney's Office called this morning. They're moving forward with charges against Celeste." I dipped the brush, watching blue paint coat the bristles. "What's she looking at?" "Federal bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. They've got the prescription forgery, the forged account applications, the trust documents. Virginia AG's office is running parallel state charges, forgery, obtaining money by false pretenses, exploitation of the elderly under Virginia Code, paragraph 18.2, 178.1. She took a breath. "Warren, if they get convictions on even half of it, she's looking at 20 to 30 years. I painted the first stroke along the shutter slat. The blue went on darker than I'd expected, almost navy in the morning light. By afternoon, it would dry to exactly the shade Iris had wanted. And Preston, the settlement includes his full cooperation with both investigations. He's giving them everything, emails, text messages. his testimony about how the accounts were opened, who forged what signature. Simone's voice softened. He's not fighting for her, Warren. He's not even trying. I thought about Preston in that parking lot, hands shaking, saying he couldn't stand up to her. Thought about Finn asking if Grandpa was mad at him. Thought about 45 years of watching my son become smaller and smaller inside a marriage that hollowed him out from the inside. Good, I said. The word came out harder than I'd meant, but I didn't take it back. Preston had made his choices for 2 decades. Now Celeste would face hers. The law would do what the law does, and I'd do what I'd always done, build something that lasted. There's one more thing, Simone said. He left an envelope for you. He wouldn't tell me what's in it, just said to make sure you got it. Bring it by later, I said. I'll be here. I hung up and climbed down to move the ladder. The first shutter was half-done blue paint drying in the December sun. 11 more shutters to go. Maybe I'd finish by New Year's. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson waved from her porch. I lifted my brush in return, and she smiled like I'd just told her a good joke, instead of standing on a ladder with paint on my hands, and my son signing away his inheritance 3 miles west. I climbed back up, dipped the brush again. The paint smelled like linseed and memories, and I worked slowly, because Iris had always said the things worth doing were worth doing right. The FBI would investigate. The prosecutors would build their case. Celeste would hire lawyers who charged $400 an hour and still couldn't make forgery look like anything but theft. Preston would testify, or he wouldn't cooperate, or he wouldn't, and eventually a judge would decide what 20 years of fraud was worth in federal prison time. I dipped my brush back into the can. The blue was exactly the color Iris had always wanted, deep and quiet, the color of early evening when the day isn't quite done, but the hardest part is behind you. I painted steadily and let the system work. Finn ordered the triple-stack pancakes on Sunday morning and asked the question I'd been waiting for since Tuesday. The shutters had taken 4 days to finish. By Saturday, they were done. 12 painted the deep blue Iris wanted drying in December sun, while I stood back and looked at what 3 years of procrastination finally became when you stopped finding reasons not to start. Sunday morning, I picked Finn up at 8:30. He climbed into my truck wearing his soccer jersey under his winter coat. Can we go to Riverside Diner? He asked. You reading my mind. You always go there on Sundays, and they have the good pancakes. The Riverside Diner sat on the corner of Maple Avenue and 4th Street, red vinyl booths, and a counter where the same regulars drank coffee and read the paper like it was still 1987. Finn slid into our usual booth and ordered before the waitress finished pouring my coffee. Mint triple-stack pancakes, please. With extra syrup, I ordered eggs and wheat toast. We didn't talk much while we waited, just sat there watching Sunday morning happen outside the window. A man walked his dog past the courthouse. 2 women stood on the corner with travel mugs talking and laughing about something I couldn't hear. Finn ate half his stack before he set his fork down and looked at me. Grandpa. Yeah, buddy. Remember when I asked about the trust fund, the one Mom said had my name in it? I set my coffee cup down. The ceramic made a soft click against the saucer. I remember. He picked up his fork, turned it over, set it back down. 9 years old, and already learning that some questions take more courage than others. What do you want to know? I asked. He looked straight at me. Is my name still in it? I looked straight back into those brown eyes. Iris's eyes, not Preston's, not Celeste's. Matta no buddy. Your name isn't in anything that isn't yours. He nodded slowly, picked up his fork again. Okay. Just like that. Okay. He went back to his pancakes like I'd just told him what time soccer practice started. Not that I'd spent 3 weeks unwinding his mother's attempt to use his name as cover for fraud. He cut another piece syrup pooling at the edge of his plate. and I watched him eat with the kind of appetite that comes from not carrying weight you shouldn't have to carry. He said okay, the way kids do when adults give them an answer. They can trust, no follow-up. No doubt, just belief that the people who love them will keep them safe. Preston had lost that somewhere between childhood and Celeste. Watching Finn pour more syrup, I made a promise to no one but myself that he wouldn't lose it the same way. We finished breakfast. I paid at the counter. Dropped Finn back at Wallace's house. Preston had asked him to take Finn for a few weeks, while the dust settled at Burwood Lane, and Wallace had said yes without hesitating the way good men do. Wednesday morning, 10 days after Preston signed the settlement, I walked into Simone's office for the last time as a client. The conference table held 4 people: Simone Wallace, myself, and a woman in a gray blazer who introduced herself as Catherine Morrison, 48, Director of Partnerships for Housing Forward Virginia, here to sign the foundation agreement. The Iris Thatcher Foundation, Simone said, sliding the document across the table. $2 million designated for affordable housing development for working families in Richmond. I pulled the papers toward me. 47 pages of legal language that boiled down to something simple: take what was stolen and turn it into something that helped people who worked hard and still couldn't afford a place to live. Iris would have liked that. She'd grown up in a rental house where the landlord raised the rent every year, and her father worked 2 jobs to keep them from moving. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my grandfather's watch. The gold caught the overhead light as I set it on the table. Not to prove who I was this time, just to remember why it mattered. I opened the lid. The engraving on the back read what it had always read: "Build things that last." My grandfather's watch had ticked through 2 world wars, the Depression, and 78 years of ordinary days before I inherited it. Now it was watching me turn $280,000 of stolen money into something clean. I closed the watch and put it back in my pocket. Picked up the pen Simone handed me. The signature line waited at the bottom of page 12, right below the mission statement Simone had drafted from my notes about what Iris would have wanted. I thought about all the signatures that had been forged over the past year: bank applications, prescription slips, trust amendments. Celeste's careful forgeries that looked like mine but weren't signatures that took and took and took. I signed my name the way Miss Alderman had taught me in 3rd grade, back when penmanship mattered, and teachers cared whether you crossed your lowercase it completely on both sides. Warren Thatcher. Every letter clear, every cross-stroke deliberate. Both sides of the T finished properly. The correct signature. Catherine Morrison signed next, then Simone as witness, then Wallace. Simone gathered the pages, tapped them straight against the table, and slid them into a folder marked with my case number for the last time. That's it," she said. "The foundation is established. Housing Forward Virginia will begin accepting applications for the first development project in January." I shook Catherine's hand, thanked her for making it simple. She smiled and said it was her job to make good ideas into real things, and this was a very good idea. Wallace walked out with me. In the parking lot, he stopped next to his car, a gray sedan he'd been driving for 12 years, because it still ran fine, and what was the point of replacing something that worked? He looked at me the way he used to look at a set of books that finally balanced. "You okay?" I thought about lying. Thought about saying what people wanted to hear. But this was Wallace, and Wallace had sat across from me at Riverside Diner 5 weeks ago and helped me count my own money that my son had stolen. "Not yet," I said, "but I will be." He nodded and didn't push it. That's the thing about Wallace. He knows when to talk and when to just stand next to a man. The latter leaned steady against the house on Thursday morning, and I climbed up with the blue paint Iris had circled in a catalog 20 years ago. Wallace was right about one thing: I wasn't okay yet. But standing on this ladder with a brush in my hand, I could see the path to okay from where I stood. And that was something. The shutters had dried from the first coat. Now I was adding the second, watching the deep navy deepen further with each stroke. The color Iris wanted. The color of early evening when the light starts to fade, but you can still see clearly enough to know where you're going. I worked slowly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because the things worth doing are worth doing right. And these shutters had waited 20 years. They could wait another hour for me to finish them properly. My phone rang in my coat pocket. I set the brush across the paint can lid and pulled it out. Preston's name on the screen. I looked at it, watched it ring once, twice, 3 times. The vibration against my palm felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Maybe wouldn't ever be ready to answer. Maybe didn't need to answer at all. I put the phone back in my pocket and picked up my brush. Some conversations you're ready for, some you're not. And some you realize don't need to happen because you've already said everything that matters by choosing not to say anything at all. The cherry tree stood in the yard behind me, bare branches against December sky. No leaves to hide behind, just the true shape of what had been growing all along. In summer, it was beautiful, full and green, shading half the backyard, where Finn and I looked for beetles. In winter, it was different. Cleaner. You could see the structure, the strong limbs and the weak ones, what would last, and what needed trimming. More honest that way. More real. I finished the second shutter and climbed down to move the ladder. The last Sunday of December came cold and clear. I picked Finn up at 9 and drove to Riverside Diner. Dot worked the morning shift. She'd worked there 16 years, knew everyone's order before they sat down, never wrote anything down, never got it wrong. She poured my coffee and brought Finn his orange juice before we'd taken our coats off. "Triple stack pancakes," Finn said, "with whipped cream. Eggs and wheat toast," I said. Finn talked about Christmas break while we waited, about the new soccer ball Wallace gave him, about the ice on the puddles by the school and how it cracked when you stepped on it just right. He ate his pancakes the way 9-year-olds do, like there was no past and no future, just right now, and maple syrup and whipped cream and someone across the table who loved you. Dot dropped the check on the table edge. $24.60. I left 32, told her to keep the change. Finn's coat zipper jammed the way it always did. I reached over and zipped it to his chin, and he looked up at me. "Grandpa, next year, can we go to a real fancy restaurant for my birthday, like with caviar?" I looked at him for a long beat. Then I smiled, a real smile from deep in my chest, where the good things live. "Sure, buddy, we'll get you caviar." "Is it good?" Honestly, not really." He tilted his head, considering that. "Then why do people eat it?" Good question. I stood up and held out my hand. "Let's go see if there's ice on the puddle by the cherry tree." He took my hand without either of us reaching first. 9 years old and already asking better questions than most adults answer in a lifetime. Why do people eat caviar if it's not good? Why do people want things that don't matter? Why do people take what isn't theirs and call it love? I didn't tell him the answer. He'd figure it out on his own, the same way every generation does, by watching what the people around him chose to value and what they chose to give away. New Year's Eve came on Sunday. I sat in the kitchen at Maple Drive at 11:58, looking out the window at the cherry tree in the darkness. The blue shutters reflected the kitchen light back at me, finished finally, the color Iris had wanted for 20 years, and I'd promised to paint someday when I had time. Someday had finally come. I took out my grandfather's gold pocket watch and placed it on the table. The weight of it, the tick of it, the history of it. I thought about Iris, about the money I'd given Preston without asking for receipts because he was my son and you don't ask your children to sign for love. About Preston in that parking lot, hands shaking, saying he saw everything now. About Finn asking why people eat caviar if it's not good. about the Iris Thatcher Foundation breaking ground in the spring for 24 units of affordable housing for families who worked full-time and still couldn't make rent. Then I thought about September, about sitting at that table with the white tablecloth and the tiny spoon, the plate placed in front of me, the bread basket pushed aside, Celeste's voice smooth as the wine she'd ordered without looking at the price, saying those words I'd carried for 3 months, like a stone in my pocket. These things are really for people who can appreciate them. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. 50 seconds. 40. 30. I picked up the watch and opened it. The engraving on the back caught the kitchen light, same as it had caught lamplight in my grandfather's hand candle light, in his father's before him. Build things that last. The clock struck 12. New Year, 2024. I slipped the watch into my breast pocket where my grandfather had always kept it. Where it belonged. Where it would stay until Finn was old enough to understand what it meant to carry something forward. A man who knows what he's built doesn't need anyone to tell him what he deserves. He already knows. And at 72, sitting in the kitchen, Iris painted yellow because it made her happy in the house we built together with money I'd earned, framing walls and pouring foundations with the watch my grandfather carried through wars and peace and 78 years of ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life. I finally stopped waiting for my family to answer Iris's question. I answered it myself. Some things are wasted on people who can't appreciate them, but some things, the right things, are never wasted at all. And to you listening to my story, remember, this family justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about choosing dignity over destruction. Looking back, I wish I'd asked harder questions earlier. I gave Preston $280,000 without a single receipt because I thought love didn't need paperwork. That was my mistake. Don't make it yours. Trust doesn't mean turning off your brain. Real love protects itself with honesty, not blind faith in people who've already shown you who they are. I learned that family justice sometimes means letting the system work while you focus on building something that lasts. Preston and Celeste chose theft. I chose the Iris Thatcher Foundation. Dad's revenge stories like mine aren't always about getting even. They're about getting clear on what matters. I believe God put me through this to show me that real strength isn't proving you're right. It's proving you're better. Barrett's recording Wallace's friendship and Simone's expertise came exactly when I needed them. If you've stayed with me this long, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you faced something similar? What would you have done differently? Share this story if you know someone navigating family justice. And if Dad's revenge stories like this one resonate with you, please subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means the world to me. A final note, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. What's real is the message, and I hope it stays with you.